You're welcome back to News Talk's Taking Stock. I'm Andy Johnston. Now, we've all seen the push and pull in recent years between employees and employers when it comes to getting people back to the office. But could a recent UK court case reveal that actually hybrid and remote working hasn't entirely settled down when it comes to that relationship between the employers and their employees? Well, I'm joined now by Michael O'Dwyer, who's the Chief UK Business Correspondent with the Financial Times, and also Chris Kane, author of Where Is My Office? Chris, Michael, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Nice to be here.
Hi, Mandy.
Michael, I'm going to start with you because you were writing about this in the Financial Times. I was fascinated by this case. It ruled a while ago, but the papers were published last week. Maybe just tell us about the case, who took the case and what did they want?
Absolutely. This was a case about a woman who was working in a quite senior role in the UK financial regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority. And she had been happily working from home and fulfilling her duties and fulfilling them well, according to her performance reviews and her own managers. But she didn't want to come back to the office despite being told that she should do so. And she applied to have full-time working from home, and that was rejected. And so she basically took a legal case against her employer, saying that she should be able to work from home full-time. Now, she was in quite a senior role. She was being paid about £140,000 a year in salary, and she was directly managing 4 people, and she was indirectly managing, I think, a team of about 10. So quite a significant amount of responsibility. And essentially, the Employment Tribunal looked at this case and said, no, that she wasn't entitled to be demanding that she could work from home full-time if her employer deemed that was not appropriate. And the judge made some very interesting comments, which I'm sure we can talk about in a wider discussion. But he said things like, that working from home didn't necessarily allow for rapid discussion or for people to have as good non-verbal communication as they might have in the office. And so he said that there were weaknesses with remote working, even if there was technology that made it possible, and which we've all obviously been using for quite some time. So I think this case was interesting, not necessarily because it sets a great binding legal precedent for all of time, but because it shows that this issue is becoming more and more difficult for employers to manage in terms of their relationships with their staff. And the judge even said as much. He said, look, there's going to be plenty more legal cases like this one in the future. And I'm sure that won't just be the case in the UK. It'll be the same in Ireland and right around the globe, I'm sure.
And Michael, just before I move on to Chris to talk about some of the bits in the article, what's the status of the case? As you said there, it's not necessarily a landmark ruling, is it? But it will be used for guidance, I guess.
No, I think my understanding of it is that it's not sort of binding legal precedent. This isn't a high court case that other courts would have to follow. It's an employment case. It's on its own facts. But it is an indication of the types of arguments that are happening between employees and employers, and it's an indication of the types of factors that judges might consider in reviewing and assessing these types of claims as and when they do end up inevitably before the courts in some cases.
Chris, I'll bring you in here. Michael has outlined what the case was about, what the ruling has happened. But I suppose what we're trying to delve into today is maybe we thought that the whole hybrid remote working model had bottomed out, but it clearly hasn't, because there are people like this lady who don't want to do any kind of hybrid working. Do you think that we're going to see more of these type of cases now as we get to the sticky end of business?
Great question. I think this case will be the first of many. COVID unleashed the genie of consumer choice as it relates to how people work, who they work for, where they work, when they work. And if you look at the particular case, in a great piece, Michael, it really highlighted a very tricky area, not just for employers and employees, but for landlords, for cities, for governments. But it's truly ironic that all of the evidence was taken virtually.
Yes, that's right. The case was all heard online, wasn't it?
And, there's been a lot of argument about performance, and this particular manager felt that her line manager had felt that she had performed well, albeit she was working remotely. And, she made the case or argued that she didn't feel disadvantaged by working remotely. But I think this whole case for working remotely full time, I would agree with Michael's view that it was right for the judge to reject full time remote working. But he also made a very important point that each case has to be, and each situation will be different and will be judged on its merits. And I think that unveils a much bigger issue for all of us, a certain generation which were used to traditional work of, get an employable position, get a pension, get a good start in life and all of that. I think we've seen the end of one-size-fits-all employment models. And that's the really big significant. And whilst many bosses have longed for a return to life as we knew it pre-COVID, there simply isn't any going back.
Yeah. Michael, one of the things that it does demonstrate, this case, is that there's a change in attitude from employers toward employees, for sure, because I think there was a time post-COVID we were trying to find what works best for the employees. Everybody's sensitive about the needs. Here in Ireland, we're at full employment, difficult to get people now. But you make a very valid point about some of the things that other companies were doing to try and entice people back into the office. Maybe take us through some of the initiatives that the large banks and big organisations are doing to try and get people back in.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's a bit of a carrot and a stick situation going on here, because some of the interventions to get people back to the office are quite positive in terms of trying to make the office more welcoming for staff, and that can extend to things like free food for staff in some of the big banking groups, for example. But also, on the more on the side that errs towards compulsion, you definitely have this element of some employers beginning to track employee attendance more rigorously, and in some cases actually threatening disciplinary action if people aren't following the policies or the guidelines that they have in place. My colleagues in the US had a story this week about Bank of America. And this was relating to US staff, but allegedly sending letters of education was the phrase that they used for these letters that they sent to their employees who hadn't been showing up to the office, and warning them that they were going to face disciplinary action if they didn't start meeting the requirements for how often they had to be in. Now, of course, the words or phrase "letters of education" might sound a bit Orwellian, but I think the overall trust of what they were telling their employees is not unique to them, even if the phrasing was.
Yeah, and it definitely displays a sort of sensitivity, but at the end of the day, they're going to tell people, like, this is your contractual obligation. Chris, one of the defences that employees have at the moment is their contract. If it's not specified, you have to be in the office. But all those contracts are going to filter through. But do you think that we're likely to see demands in new contracts for sole remote working, like this lady wanted? Like, if I'm starting with you in a negotiation, is it reasonable for me to say, look, I'm brilliant, you can't get me anyplace else, and I want to work from home all the time? Do you see any of that?
Yes, you do. And the issue is that it's just so dispersed across industry sectors, the public sector. Like, if you take the UK, the civil service last year, I think the amount of people there opting within their contracts for some form of home working. And this is where the devil is in the detail and how we use phrases. Like, remote working typically defines somebody working for an organisation completely remotely. Then you have this issue of what do you mean to work from home? And then you've got this hybrid label. And in Britain, many people are now regarded as, they're sort of by somewhat known as a rude title, which is the short run of Tuesday, Wednesdays and Thursdays. Like, I was in Bishopsgate delivering a speech on Wednesday, and at 10 o'clock outside Liverpool Street Station, I could cross the road because there was no traffic. So something has happened between the relationship between people and place and staff and employers. And we're in the midst of a massive reorganisation of work models. Michael,
you're the UK business correspondent, the chief correspondent for the Financial Times. So you're across all business. You also make a very valid point, and Chris referred to it earlier, that this is not just about the relationship between employers and employees. It's about office space, it's about commercial value, it's about hollowed out cities, unserviced suburbs. there's lots of implications for this new norm. What I'm trying to get a sense of from you, having the bandwidth to look at business in its totality, do you think that we've bottomed out, or is the new perspective from business, look, I got to make this commercial space work for me, or I got to take care of my people now? Is there still that sort of push and pull between the two?
There is, and look, every industry and every company, frankly, will be different, and some of them are using this as a way to attract staff by allowing them to have more flexibility, and others say, such as some of the investment banks that you mentioned, are saying that this is our culture. We need people to be in working at close quarters. It makes communication easier. It helps the next generation to learn faster, a lot of them say, and it means you'll get access to better assignments. You'll be more likely to be considered for pay rises and promotions. Some CEOs are publicly saying that. But it's not just, you're right, it's not just the companies themselves. If you look at the City of London and the financial district there, the authorities are really trying to help and work with hospitality businesses to try and make them more of a seven-day industry, catering to tourists, even in the financial district more than before, to try and basically make up for the revenue that they're losing from people who are no longer in the office on a Monday or a Friday, buying their sandwich, buying their coffee, having a pint with colleagues after work. So the implications of this are absolutely massive and extend right throughout the economy, including, as you mentioned, the commercial offices and commercial property space. A lot of companies are, as and when their leases are coming up for renewal in the UK, are looking at downsizing, sometimes getting nicer offices, but smaller offices. Again, pitching to employees, come in 2-3 days a week. The office is going to be more of a venue, more of a place to interact with colleagues, have nice coffee bars, and other things to tempt people into work. And I think, employers are having to work a bit harder to reimagine office spaces and try and, frankly, attract their employees to come in, where previously it was just a given that they turned up.
If you're just tuning in, folks, you're listening to News Talk's Taking Stock. I'm Mandy Johnston. I'm speaking with Michael O'Dwyer, who's Chief UK Business Correspondent with the Financial Times. And here in studio with me is Chris Kane, who is author of Where Is My Office? And we're talking about an article that Michael wrote about a UK court case and a manager who wanted to work from home and the consequences of all that remote working. Chris, and back to you. I read something that you wrote quite recently, and I think you were referencing John Healy in it, Nobody Shouted Stop, just back referencing that point that Michael was making there about the hollowed out cities and beyond our narrow view of as employer and employee, the civic questions around this. Do you think that politicians are active enough in trying to shape the type of new working landscape, new cities that Michael was talking about there, or has business sort of been left out there to it on its own?
God, that's a very big question. I can make an Irish-English comparison in that Ireland has, and published some years back, a remote working policy after COVID, and talked about the 3 pillars of right to work remotely, digital hubs, and employee sort of rights, and creating hubs to support all of that, and the technology to support it. Britain seems to be a bit more in flux. The mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, has talked about the 15-minute city to reduce commuting. So there's nothing settled. I think we're in the midst of a big experiment to redefine work in the context of office work, which will have direct implications for the cities, for CBDs, for transport, for infrastructure. This is much bigger, and I think it's something that politicians need to wake up and look at, because you take an Irish context and the homelessness side of things and the shortage of homes. Maybe if we rebalanced our little country, maybe then we might have a better country. And the same can be said for Britain in terms of how the southeast relates to the rest of the UK. So there are some big macro implications here which nobody has really started to grapple with.
Michael, Chris referenced there UK in a bit of a flux. That's a shocker that the UK is in a bit of a flux on anything at the moment. I'm going to leave the final word to you on this. Do you think that this court case and the ruling stemming from it has caused a little ripple effect and will prompt more people or embolden more employers?
Honestly, it's hard to say, so I'm going to kick for touch. But I do think what it really does is it strikes a chord with an issue that we're all living with, that we're all thinking about and talking about, with whether that's with colleagues at work or just your friends at home. I think employers are constantly grappling with this and trying to figure out, how do we balance attracting the right people, making sure that they are actually working as productively as possible, and, as you said earlier, Mandy, making sure that we're not spending more than we have to on office space at the same time. And that's a balance that will be different for every business, but is also, I think, a story that is not yet completely finished. I think there's a few chapters still to go before we see where it really ends up.
Well, I think, as you've both said, the world has changed utterly and entirely since we three started our working careers, but it has opened up huge possibilities. But for now, we're going to have to leave it there. That was Michael O'Dwyer, Chief UK Business Correspondent with the Financial Times, and Chris Kane, the author of Where Is My Office? Thank you both very much, gentlemen, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this